Moshkovsky. I'm the Executive Director of the Center for Community Media at CUNY's Newmark J School. This is our second forum with New York City candidates, with New York City mayoral candidates for 2021. This forum is part of our signature Newsmakers series, on-the-record conversations between public officials, civic leaders, and community media journalists. The New York community media is an essential component of the local media ecosystem. More than 300 news organizations that serve neighborhoods in mostly immigrant communities and communities of color in 36 languages other than English. Before I pass the mic on to Debrali Santos, Editor-in-Chief of the Manhattan Times and the Bronx Free Press, I would like to thank Maya Wiley, Kwanda Francis, Carlos Menchaca, and Sean Donovan for joining us today, and to all the community media journalists attending. Please, this is for the journalists attending, please use the chat box to offer your comments, to ask questions to the candidates. Don't wait until they're done. You can just add the question at any moment, and then Debrali will see your question and read it out loud and ask the question to the candidates. We are recording this conversation, and then we will share the recording afterwards. We knew in the past forum that many of you asked for the recording to post it in your YouTube pages or your websites, and that's perfectly fine. So right after this is over, we're gonna share that with you. And please stay tuned for upcoming communications on dates and times for our 5 conversations with the rest of the candidates that we will be doing from now on until June. So Debrali, the floor is yours. And I'll let you to take over.
Gracias, Graciela, por la presentación. And thank you to all that are joining us. It is quite a wonderful opportunity to share with the mayoral candidates selected for this afternoon's discussion. And as Graciela mentioned just a few moments before, the community that is represented here is a wide array of ethnic and racial communities throughout the city of New York, representing over 37 languages, some of which we'll speak today, but certainly we're hoping for as robust a conversation as the participants here represent. And we're grateful for the opportunity to discuss the issues of the day with the 4 candidates joining us this afternoon. Because we know that interest is high and time is short, we'll turn the floor directly over to the first of our candidates, Sean Donovan. We're going in alphabetical order. Sean, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you all for having me, and more importantly, for the work you all do every day to keep New York's communities informed. In this time of uncertainty and struggle, I'm the only candidate with the right combination of deep experience during crisis, bold, comprehensive ideas, and the understanding of government at all levels needed to bring about the real change and support that New Yorkers need. I'm a lifelong New Yorker who became a public servant because I grew up in a different time of crisis. My father's an immigrant who grew up in Costa Rica and Lima, Peru, came to this city and found opportunity. But I saw all around me those who couldn't benefit from opportunity. I saw homelessness exploding on our streets. I saw neighborhoods like the South Bronx and Central Brooklyn crumbling, literally burning to the ground. And it lit a fire in me to go to work on behalf of communities across this city. I started volunteering in a homeless shelter in college. I came back after I finished school to work at a nonprofit with leaders like Ana Vicente of Nos Quedamos in the South Bronx and Bishop Johnny Ray Youngblood to build Nehemiah homes for more than 5,000 families moving directly out of public housing. That began a 30-year career on the front lines of housing and homelessness, of racial and economic justice, that taught me what it means to lead through crisis. I was housing commissioner in this city in the wake of 9/11. I was asked by President Obama to be housing secretary in the midst of the worst housing crisis of our lifetimes. When Sandy hit our shores and my neighbors in Brooklyn lost their homes, their businesses, a friend even lost his daughter in the storm, President Obama asked me to lead the entire federal recovery effort to build back better and stronger and safer. And because no good deed goes unpunished, he then asked me to lead the $4 trillion federal budget. And 3 weeks later, Ebola emerged. And I was working side by side with Dr. Fauci, our military leaders, President Obama and Vice President Biden to make sure that an emerging global health threat didn't become a pandemic that cost tens of thousands of New Yorkers their lives. Through all that crisis, I've learned that those who are the most vulnerable before a crisis hits are always hurt the worst. That's why I was outraged, but not surprised, that COVID has disproportionately devastated communities of color in this city and across this country. And that's why I know that we have to begin and focus our recovery on those communities that are too often left behind. That's why I'm running the campaign of ideas to reimagine our right to shelter in this city as a right to housing. That's why I've proposed remaking our neighborhoods into what I call 15-minute neighborhoods, where every New Yorker has within 15 minutes of their front door, not only a great public school and a great job or transportation to get to one, but also the healthcare that they need, so that in our next pandemic, we don't have disproportionate devastation in Black and brown communities, so that everyone can get a vaccine 15 minutes from their front door. And to introduce ideas like equity bonds that would fundamentally remake the devastating racial wealth gap in our city, where the average white family has 10 times the wealth of the average Black family, 8 times the wealth of the average Latino family. Those are the campaign of ideas that are driving my candidacy. I look forward to our conversation about those. And together, if we put those ideas into place, we can not only repair and rebuild this city, but reimagine it as a city that works for everyone. Thank you for having me today.
Thank you, Sean. And now joining us is Ms. Quanda Francis, who will jump in with her own opening statement.
Yes, I'd like to first say, I'd like to thank you guys for having me. I want to kind of jump in and just give you some insight into my background. So I am physically, mentally, and emotionally from a community that has been left behind, and it's still being left behind. And my why is so loaded because I've heard a lot from the mayoral candidates, and they're still not speaking to the issues that are facing people in the communities that I've come from, people in the communities that I still work with. And we can talk about messaging. Messaging is great, but we need to get back to the basics of investing in people. And for me, you know, as I said, I like to I don't like to call myself a casualty of poor, you know, policies, but, you know, for me, growing up in Brooklyn, dropping out of high school, being pregnant by 17 and a victim of domestic violence, and then having to come to the realization that I need more and I want more, and trying to look and identify resources that would allow me to reach my fullest potential and see that they're not there. It wasn't a priority for them to be there. And at this juncture, I still don't feel like our communities are a priority. When we talk about things that we love, we prioritize everything that we love and things that are important to us. And right now we're at a situation where, you know, communities of color are facing a pandemic, but we've been in a pandemic. And our children are not being educated to their fullest potential. And, you know, for me, I like to talk about, you know, academic environments and learning styles and et cetera, because it's important. We have a leadership crisis and we don't have the right people in place to build a New York City that works for everyone. And I say that and I look at our education system. Our education system is still now, like, you know, producing individuals that are great at memorizing facts, but they're not producing good thinkers. And we could talk about our content, we could talk about, you know, a culturally rich education, but unless we are really talking about producing a society that is able to think, right? We want to be in a position to tell people what to do, but not how to do it. And, you know, for me, in terms of earning my first degrees from NYU and knowing that I spent one semester in high school, I feel as if, well, I know that my situation doesn't exist in a vacuum. And then to know that now I've earned an MBA, I'm working on a PhD, and I would tell you that standardized tests still don't adequately capture my brilliance. So I want to ensure that every mayoral candidate understands that you are not communicating with the communities that need you most. And if you are serious about building a New York City that works for everyone, you will back down on your messaging and get into these communities and understand why they're being left behind.
Thank you, Ms. Francis. Joining us now is Carlos Menchaca.
Thank you, Deborah Lee, and buenas tardes to everyone. I'm Carlos Menchaca, City Council member right now, but I'm running for mayor. And I'm running for mayor to represent communities that have been disconnected from government. So much what I've learned as a city council member has been in activism with community. When I ran for office back in 2013, it was right after the devastation that impacted Red Hook. I was riding my bike around and saw the devastation, and I saw government fail. We got to work. The community came together, and together we made something happen. We created the power of community to be able to respond. That excited me to be a council member, and I beat an incumbent, which was not an easy feat, but it was a part of the power that I see community play in government. Immediately when I became a council member, I became the chair of the Immigration Committee. And through that, we have been doing some incredible work, including bringing identification card called IDNYC to over 1 million people. That was an idea that was generated by community, immigrant communities, communities that not speak English at home. And this has been my work. In this time, we have seen incredible crisis, and it is communities like the immigrant community, communities that do not speak English at home, that have suffered the most. But it is the ethnic media community that I've been, and the community newspapers, and I think what we have to kind of talk about both of these as one, that have been incredibly impressive and supportive of our communities that have been disconnected. In 2016, we put together a hearing that has never been done before, where we brought ethnic media to the front of the city council to talk to us about the needs. It was this group that gave us an understanding about what the mayor's office needed to do to ensure that you got what you need. And so I stand with you today. I will, as mayor, bring an ethnic media and community newspaper czar to ensure that there is full transparency about the amount of dollars that are going out to advertise and to communicate. Right now, we are having incredible trouble with the administration translating simple documents out to our communities around COVID, the vaccine, the process to get a test, and other information. But it is our office, the city council office, where we are constantly translating, and it is hard. We talked a little bit about this before this forum, where we couldn't even get the resources to be able to do 35, 37 languages, which would be what we needed to do to be able to communicate to everybody. It takes resources. And as mayor, I will bring those resources, and I will bring you in as media that is so incredibly important to communicate these bigger issues. You've seen my work, you know me. I was so proud to receive the IPPES Award at the 15th annual ceremony. And so this is the work that we can continue to do. You have the ideas, you have the understanding. Let's make that happen. And on the platforms, I want to bring housing to people. Shelters have not worked. We spent $3 billion. We can actually bring rent relief to people and actually convert micro units out of hotels and out of commercial spaces. And so I look forward to the questions today and to talk to you more about my platform. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Council Member. Joining us now is Ms. Maya Wiley.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure to be here because for me, ethnic and community media is personal. My grandfather was an amazing man, and as a Black man growing up in the Depression, actually with a young family in the Depression, selling Bibles, not able to make a living doing it during the Depression, but what he was really wanted to be was a journalist, but he couldn't afford to go to college. But he did start a Black newspaper, even though that wasn't his paid job. And it was centrally important to the fight for Black racial justice, because it was the only voice for the Black community in all the civil rights violations, all the injustices that were going on. And he later became a postal clerk for the US Postal Service, but he continued to operate that Black newspaper, and he couldn't get paid for it as a job. So let's just think about that. But, you know, as someone who cares so much about communities of color, because not only did I grow up in one, when I was a little kid, my parents were activists, and I became a civil rights lawyer, because for me, one of the things that has been so important about New York City is that it has been a city that has all of us. But we know far too much was broken before COVID. And one of the most important voices, not just in what's happening in communities, but also communicating to communities what is so central and important in opportunity to get help from government, is our local and community press. So when COVID hit my own Central Brooklyn community, and we knew our mom and pop shops, which maybe is the shawarma shop on the corner, the roti shop, or the beauty parlor, the barber shop, we knew they weren't going to know how to get access to the services and supports for small businesses from government. And we went to Radio Soleil. We went as volunteers offering services to make sure our communities knew what we had to offer, but what programs existed we could help them access. Now, the programs themselves, though, were broken. So I'm running for mayor because, one, I recognize how important you are to making sure we stay a city that serves and supports and invests in all our communities, no matter where you were born, no matter what language you speak, no matter how much you earn or whether you earn anything at all. And that is the kind of dignity we all deserve. So our plans include, one, that we're going to spend $10 billion to create 100,000 new jobs. And we're going to focus that spend on communities hard hit by COVID. And so many of them are the communities that you are the information bringer and sharer for. And the other thing we're going to do is the caring economy, because we also know that it is women, and particularly women of color, immigrant women, who have been the backbone of our economy, of our small businesses, but also, importantly, of taking care of our kids, our elderly family members, our people with disabilities. So we're going to create community care centers where families, no matter your immigrant status, you do not have to have papers for the service, can drop off family members if you have emergency, or you can't afford to give up some of those earnings to work, or anything else that is a place in the community for you. But we're also going to put $5,000 in grants for care, for family care, in a minimum of the 100,000 neediest people in our communities. And once again, we're going to scale it from there. But once again, that is going to include folks, whether or not they have documentation to be in this country, because it is every single one of our residents that is an important member and part of our community, of our care, and of what we care about. So I look forward to talking more. I apologize that I'm going to have to leave at 2:50, but I hope I can follow up with each and every one of you separately.
Thank you all. And a quick reminder to everyone who's joining us on the call, both as participants on the panel and also the journalists and publishers. This is a wonderful opportunity for a conversation that's rather limited. Please feel free for the journalists to pepper our chat box with as many questions as possible. We can always relay them to the candidates. And moreover, to the candidates, please know that although all the questions will not be answered in this conversation, the journalists and publishers of whom you speak are readily available vis-a-vis they can always be reached out to and engaged in separate discussion. So we want to make sure this is a starting point and not necessarily the end once we all have to log off. Having said that, COVID is simply nothing more than a matter of life and death. And although the good news is that the city has reported that over 1 million doses of the vaccine have been administered, and that they continue apace with the limited supply that's been provided, what's not great news is the fact that there is the ethnic disparity many feared would emerge. And the city's own data showed 44% of white residents have received, to date, have received the vaccine, where 11% of Black residents, 16% of Latino residents, and 15% of Asian residents have. I need not tell anyone on this call that these are the communities that were hardest hit and disproportionately affected and continue to be by COVID and all of its consequences. I would like for each of the candidates, and I'll just simply return in alphabetical order to Sean, to Mr. Donovan, and ask, given this and given the fact that this was something that could have been foretold, what grade overall, considering this and many other factors, would you give this administration and how it's managed its response, specifically on COVID, the vaccines, not just in terms of the pandemic? And secondly, what would you have done and potentially will do differently to ensure that this inequity is righted? And I ask, of course, that we keep our answers simply as short as we can. Thank you.
Sure, Deborah Lee. And look, I've said this before and I'll say it again. I would give the current administration an R for racist for this vaccine response. What would I have done differently? First of all, I would have made sure New York City had more vaccine. One of the challenges has been a shortage, and nobody in this race is in a better position to be able to do that. It's not just my relationship with President Biden and Vice President Harris, but Jeff Zients, who's leading the COVID response team, is a good friend of mine and former colleague. The person who led my health policy team for my campaign is now working on the COVID team at the White House. And there's no question that I'm in the best position to be able to get New York City the help that it needs. But that's only one part of the problem. Fundamentally, this goes to the inequity I talked about in my opening remarks. And we need to create true 15-minute neighborhoods where everything you need to live a healthy life, not just a true public option, preventive and primary care that is delivered in a culturally appropriate way. I have a true public option that would be available to everyone in New York, regardless of immigration status. And we need to make sure that the underlying disparities that are driving health differences, access to fresh food, access to parks, access to all of the things that make for health more broadly, not just healthcare, are available. And I would make sure, most importantly, that we build deep partnerships with the community organizations who have the trust of residents across this city. I've learned this over and over again. I started working with a nonprofit in the South Bronx and Central Brooklyn around this city at the very beginning of my career, and learned that if somebody doesn't have an iPad and can't sign up, if somebody does not speak the same language or distrusts government and going to a website because of their immigration status, we must have deep partnerships with locally community-based organizations that can knock on the door, sign people up. And we should be delivering vaccines directly to those community groups through mobile testing and mobile vaccination sites that can go into community rooms, that can go into public housing, that can go to the places where people are who are so often left behind.
Thank you. Ms. Francis, if you could answer the same question as well.
So what I will say is I would give the current administration an F. They don't understand the communities they service. As mayor, I understand the information seeking channels of our most vulnerable communities. I held a couple of forums with nightlife promoters and utilize them as a vehicle to get to communities to, have them understand the risk of COVID-19, have them understand the risk of the vaccinations, allow them to just get the information that they need so they can make good decisions. As an accountant, as a data scientist, as a researcher, and I have a process for things. And we need to understand that there's a way to say that, we have all of these resources that are here for you, but we have a large group of people that don't have the tools that they need to evaluate information. And then again, there's a digital divide, and it's just been we've done a very poor job of communicating with marginalized communities, not just the risks factors of COVID-19, but even just information about the vaccine. Like there's some reports that say that even if you are vaccinated, you can still spread. So that's important for communities that are in multi-generational households to know that, okay, well, one person may have gotten the vaccine, but they can still potentially spread it to other people in the family. We need to ensure that everyone has the information that they need so they can make the best decisions for their family. And again, I say an F because that's just not happening. Right now, we have leadership that is, I like to compare them to the leak in the roof. We have leaders that they know there's a roof, they know there's a leak in the roof, and they just decide we're going to put a bucket there. Instead of saying we need to fix the roof, we need to determine what we need to fix the roof, and then execute and fix the roof. And so again, for the third time, F, my new website has just launched. My comprehensive education plan has just been released. And once we start teaching people how to not just understand information, but how to evaluate the information, then we have a group of New Yorkers that are able to make better decisions for themselves as well as their families.
Thank you. Mr. Menchaca.
Thank you for this question. This mayor and this administration failed, but it was on top of the failure of the governor and of the president. Things are beginning to shift and change, but there was so much that the city could have done to confront this. And we are now getting more vaccines. I know that the storm has caused some issues, and we're on calls right now to really understand the actual impact, and people are not going to get to their appointments because those vaccines are not going to reach us. And so what I want to lift up right now is what we're talking about here is what the city, a municipal government can do. One, it can build trust. We did an amazing job at the census operation, the council, and I was the co-chair of the census task force that really led the funding of a $40 million municipal government initiative. When the mayor said, no, we have enough, which is a fraction of what we were able to do, that actually got information to people. How did that happen? That happened because we funded organizations that have trust with organizations, that we're able to bring people that have that kind of relationship, that were speaking the language, that were culturally sensitive. That's how we should have done this. While we were doing census, there was no communication to build a relationship with the same team that were out there building relationships in the census to be able to bring solid information around the vaccine that was on its way and the test, the COVID testing, and information about what it is, how to prevent it. And so we failed as a city of New York. Now we have an incredible technology issue where the city council, we're looking at a bill to create one hub where everything can get presented to a New Yorker to get the right information. But we have lost that trust. And the fact that ICE is working with our local NYPD, and we saw that when they were defending precincts, has caused a chilling effect in all our immigrant communities because the mayor refuses to say no, that actually happened. And so we have a big issue right now with some of our most vulnerable COVID impacted communities, when what we should be doing is defunding the NYPD and refunding our communities with the things that they need, food and rental assistance and other things that are important to communities. So big failure. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Ms. Wiley.
Agree with my colleagues. And F, here's the thing. I'm someone who actually did access to healthcare as a civil rights lawyer and advocate, including on healthcare reform. What we saw was predictable. And in fact, as others have said, we saw it even in the testing of COVID, and we had time. We knew in advance that vaccine was gonna come, even when we didn't know the exact date. And we had, and I'll give you one example, a church here in Central Brooklyn, Black Baptist Church, in 2 days, finally convinced the city government to give that church access to some tests. And they got 500 people tested for COVID in 2 days. But instead of learning its own lesson, the administration simply failed to have a strategy that included faith-based leaders of all faiths, that recognized the geography of the heaviest impact of COVID where we had the highest death rates which were in communities of color of all different colors, and that where our essential workers were, and our overcrowded housing conditions, and a geographic approach that literally partnered with community-based organizations, with faith-based leaders, with others, and actually crowdsource some of the tremendous ideas we've already heard right here on this Zoom. I mean, Kwanda's point about, nightlife promoters is a fantastic idea. Carlos is absolutely right about what we saw with Census 2020 and his leadership. These were examples of building off the know-how and the solutions that come up from community-based leadership, from trusted partners. And I saw someone ask in the chat, lots of Black folks, for example, didn't trust it. We saw the government, unfortunately, from the governor's office, demonstrate to Black folks they have to worry about government when we saw that they were getting the hydrochloroquine at the Veterans Affairs Hospital without even their loved ones being informed. That is exactly what drives distrust, but the community-based partnerships, the faith-based leader partnerships, the getting engaged, trusted partners is exactly how we do things differently, and we should have done it in advance, and that's what I would have done if I was mayor.
Thank you. As you know, we're collapsing a couple of questions in light of the time restraints. And so I'm going to start again with you, Ms. Wiley, and ask a question that's being asked of all the candidates. But given your time at City Hall and your work with CCRB, this is germane certainly to your scope of work. How would you balance, and how will you balance going forward as a candidate, but particularly if you were to assume the mantle of mayor, the concerns around defund the police, the calls for less policing, with what is really a grave concern about the spikes in crime, as you've seen when it comes to the subways and other transit paths, but essentially these two competing concerns in a way that are going to meet the needs of New York City residents.
Thank you. I'd start by putting the public back in public safety. And what I mean by that is making sure that we're having the civilian side of government and with engagement from community on setting the priorities of policing. Because right now, what we do is we have a police department that essentially gets the calls for every crisis, whether or not it requires a police officer. And that's not smart spending of precious dollars and resources. And so by setting the priorities like on gun violence, where what we need are police ensuring that they're taking care of illegal guns coming into our communities. That's a priority of policing I've heard from community with high rates of gun violence. But the other thing I hear very clearly from community, including from a friend of mine, Naquan McLean, whose nephew was shot down at 4:30 in the afternoon in central Brooklyn, killed at 22 years old, just going to his neighborhood store. But what the family said was, we need jobs for our summer, for our youth. We need more investment in schools. We need to have trauma-informed care. When they got asked, did the police precinct put in more officers on that corner? The answer was yes, but it wasn't what the community saw as the priority, including the traumatized family members. What they said is it's not going to prevent the next shooting. Not that we don't need police, but it's what should they be doing as a result of that. And so we're creating a participatory justice fund that puts $18 million we take from the police department, put it in the hands of communities with high rates of gun violence so they can, as experts of what they need in community to prevent the violence, can say what those resources go to support. The other example is the subways. Let's take that, because a lot of that is about mental health and people who have mental health crises, who are homeless, and who deserve housing and support services to treat those things. And right now, what we do is we have the police department as the first line of response, even though they're not the experts. And so what we should do is follow models that have already been demonstrated to work, where we're investing, first of all, in a housing first model, where we're putting folks who are homeless, who need support services, in permanent housing with those services. But also, to the extent we need outreach and response to crisis, we have a crisis response team that is made up of the professionals, including peer folks, because they have been in the situation themselves, that are much more effective at getting folks off the streets. That creates public safety and around the concerns that I've heard directly from people. But it also requires being very clear about the rules of the road, because when I was at CCRB, what was clear is that if you don't have the rules of the road clear about what police officers can or cannot do, then there is not sufficient accountability, and it's not fair to the communities. It's also not fair to the police officers, because then they get in trouble after the fact when there wasn't enough clarity. But we can fix that. We can be clear.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Wiley. Mr. Menchaca, we're just going to go right up to the same list. Carlos, if you could also answer that question and speak to what it is that you would do as mayor to balance those concerns.
Thank you. So this is where we need to turn a page and go away from the previous administrations, go away from administrations that have created half answers and half opportunities to actually reimagine our NYPD and our relationship to our communities. And that's what I bring. I bring a fresh voice, a voice that's not connected to the past, and instead is thinking about the future in communities that have been talking to us as government, but have gotten nowhere. And I think that that's where we start, is defunding the NYPD in a very, very dramatic way. I'm calling for $3 billion. I think we can possibly get more when we look at the overtime that the police use today, when they are in places that they should not be, where we are funding lawsuits against officers who are involved in criminal activity or assaults of our community. That's where we can actually fund the things that we are all talking about, social workers and mental health professionals that can actually address some of these issues and interrupt violence. But the administrations of the past have not gone there. They do not understand that kind of need, and we were going to have to confront this in a real way. The work that's happening in the subways is just a disgrace as well. The fact that we're sending more police when we should be sending social workers to engage our homeless community that are needing a place to stay but won't stay in our shelters because what we're doing is warehousing them. That's the kind of courage that we need, and we need someone that can take that political courage and make something happen. So the balance is to tip it from what we have seen in the past. And I think that the last thing I want to say about this is that the city council will be voting on a budget in a few months at the same time that we're going to be electing the next mayor on the Democratic line. And so let us demonstrate what we're talking about now. We are in an opportunity today, and I will be the only candidate to have power in the council to make that vote and to bring that voice. And so I hope that they all stand with us to make that happen. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm going to now ask the candidates, unfortunately, because our time is so limited as we move forward, to try and limit their responses to 30 seconds, and I'll start harumphing into your ear or your screen. But I do want to give an opportunity to respond. But again, I would ask you to keep it just as short as you possibly can. And again, know that you can continue to engage with all the journalists and publishers here because you can simply liaise with them after. So Ms. Francis, if you would.
Yes, I've already called for cutting the NYPD's budget by 27% in funding my operation pipeline, which is in a plan that's in my education plan, to fund the community schools and programs. And so that's outlined in my education plan. There is a huge issue in terms of the NYPD, in terms of, so again, that's in my education plan. I'm cutting the budget by 27%. But it is important for us to understand that we need to keep all New Yorkers safe from harm. And as someone that has, I've recently known someone personally that was a victim of gun violence. So it is an issue. And so I want to be knowledgeable of the time and say that 27% of a cut for the funding is in the plan that I released today. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Donovan.
Thank you. And to try to be quick, I would do three things. I would reimagine policing, reduce the role of police, but also reduce what we spend in our correction system and reinvest into community-based programs that actually break the cycle of incarceration. If we do those three things, we can put justice in our criminal justice system. Reducing the role of police means, as Maya has talked about, we need to stop criminalizing homelessness. But we've also got to stop sending police into the hallways of our schools. And we need to focus the police on guns and violent crime. We can reimagine policing by creating real accountability and transparency, training police for de-escalation and other techniques, and we can reduce what we spend in our criminal justice, in our correction system. Think about this. We spend over $400,000 per prisoner per year at Rikers. It is completely unacceptable and we get bad results. We need to reinvest not only on the police side, but on the correction side into community-based programs. If we do that, I believe that we could get to $500 million a year within 2 years. And by the end of my first term, $3 billion a year that would be reinvested in community-based programs. The last thing I will say is, this is not theory to me. It's not rhetoric. It's reality. When I was budget director, I stopped the United States from giving excess military equipment to police forces across the country. When I was housing commissioner, I took my housing vouchers, gave them to folks coming out of Rikers, and the results were remarkable. A year later, 95% of those folks were stably housed, getting back to jobs, and hadn't reoffended. Imagine what we could do if we not only provided housing, but job training and all the other supports that we need. We can reimagine, reduce, and reinvest in our communities.
Thank you, Sean. Given the fact that the audience is comprised of so many, again, ethnic journalists and publishers, one of the questions that has popped up repeatedly speaks to the concerns, specifically in the Asian American community, when they've seen these racist rhetoric and physical attacks, particularly here in New York City. So this is not just sort of a generalized conversation, but one that's important for residents here. As recently as yesterday, there was an attack that was publicized. And so the specific question from Alana Tang here is, what will you do to ensure and protect that Asian American New Yorkers can help fulfill our community's position as America's preeminent melting pot? But essentially the question comes down to, how will you handle these instances of both the rhetoric and the physical assaults within the communities being affected? And I'm just going to start with Ms. Francis and go back down that list.
What I will say is that it's important, as it said, to protect all of our residents from harm. And I would push for anyone that is responsible for these crimes to be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. And again, I have a plan in terms of how to reduce the budget, but not by jeopardizing public safety. I was a crime analyst and a researcher, so I do understand a lot about the NYPD's budgets and the inner workings, that I know where we can make the cuts that we need, ensure that every New York City resident is safe from financial crimes, cybersecurity, gun violence, hate crimes, anything else that can jeopardize the quality of life of our New York City residents.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Francis. I think, Ms. Wiley, you're going to have to jump off soon, so I just wanted to go to you on this last point.
Thank you. This is, look, as a human rights lawyer, as someone who sat on the board of Human Rights Watch, we've seen far too often how hate crimes also spike because of what leaders say, like a Donald Trump, who simply stokes so much anti-Asian, particularly anti-Chinese racism. And unfortunately, so one of the things we can do is, first of all, as mayor, I'd be in Asian communities, in Islamic communities, right? We know Islamophobia, there are Asians who are Islamic, that we have to actually recognize these things as people who are demonized solely because of who they are, and where and how a mayor shows up, and how and where a mayor draws attention and both breaks down stereotypes, builds bridges, and refuses to tolerate violence is critical. But I'd also then deploy the appropriate resources. So conversations with community about where or how the best ideas for partnering to create more safety. One of the things that we did in the university side, for example, is actually create partnerships so that students and faculty and staff could volunteer to also walk or be with people when they had to go places if they felt like they were going to be vulnerable. That's something the city can do also through New York City Service, because we have an agency that helps to do things like that. But also the Human Rights Commission, because there's an education function, a public education function in the commission. It reported to me when I was in City Hall, and one of the things, thanks also to partnership with the City Council, we were able to beef up the public education resources that's also so important to fighting some of the stereotypes and the crimes that can result from it. But punishing and making sure we are seriously punishing hate crimes is also critically important, and I will do that as mayor. And I apologize for needing to run, but please reach out to press@mayawileyformayor.com. I'd love to continue the conversation. And also, Deborah Lee, I hope we can also get a list just to make sure we can follow up directly as well. But thank you for your time. Thank you all. Thank you to my colleagues, and look forward to more soon.
Thanks, Maya.
Thank you, Maya.
Thanks, Maya.
I'm going to circle right back to you, Sean, and have you answer that question just as briefly as you possibly can.
Absolutely. Look, I believe fundamentally that as the leader of this city, as mayor, you have to speak out loudly and clearly about instances of hate. That's true right now with a president who was calling coronavirus, the China virus, completely unacceptable. But I've also seen in other moments after 9/11, I saw too many Muslims in this city victimized and scapegoated. And I've seen it in other times growing up in this city as well. We need a mayor who speaks forcefully on these issues, but we also need a mayor who knows how to back up those words with real action and enforcement. Again, this is not theory to me. I led the charge under President Obama to enforce the Fair Housing Act. I took on racist executives and mayors across this country. In fact, so much so that Donald Trump, when he had a Twitter account, was attacking Joe Biden for my work, saying the racists saying we were trying to destroy the suburbs by making sure that Black and brown people could live wherever they chose. Again and again, whether it be on these issues, on LGBTQ issues, where I was the first cabinet secretary in history to endorse marriage equality, on all of these issues, I have always spoken out loudly, but I have backed that up with real enforcement to make the words reality.
Thank you. And Councilmember Menchaca, if you could finish this up for us.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to say that Sean is right. The mayor should be out there every single day until these hate crimes decrease in number, and he's not. And I think what we need to do is actually bring, as a city, the AAPI community together and follow their lead. And if you're listening to them, they're saying a couple things. One is that we have to balance this idea that what we don't need more is incarceration. I think that's part of the balance here, to ensure that people understand that we are fighting with them as a community that is being attacked. As a Mexican in the city, I know how hard it's been to be walking the streets when Trump was in power and expounding all the hate. But what we need is the city to respond with resources. And there are organizations right now that are struggling with ensuring that people have food, to ensure that people have access to information about COVID. We need to bring more resources to the AAPI community. That's what this mayor needs to do, so they can feel like they have love, and they can actually bring education programs where they're seeing hate, to attack it in our schools and in our communities. And that's the way through. But they have to be leading the way with ideas, and the city has to respond.
Great, thank you. I know, again, time is very limited, so feel free to continue to pepper the chat box with questions, because they will be forwarded to the candidates, and the candidates are looking at them and they're actually able to answer a few as they go along. This is something that is critically important to community and ethnic media. The conversations around the kind of support that any administration you would lead would offer it. The fact is, as you've all noted, and being part of this panel, but also in your comments, the community and ethnic media often are the lifelines of communication and the message bringers to communities. They speak their language, they're culturally competent and appropriate, and they actually reach them on the ground in the spaces that they gather, the spaces that they still can, but also service platforms also to bring back information. So I'm just going to go directly to Sean. Sean, again, in the briefest of terms, and you can expand on this later, do you are you expressing support for Executive Order 47, which speaks to the support that the administration would lend, your administration would lend to community and ethnic media? And what beyond that would you look to pledge on this forum to the journalists and publishers that are here and present?
Absolutely, I'm supportive. I have been demonstrating that in my campaign. We have done roundtables, media outreach. We've brought together ethnic and community-based journalists to roll out many of my platforms. I'm running the campaign of ideas. Every week, we've been putting out a major new platform. Tomorrow, we're putting out our health plan, and we would welcome all of that. As mayor, though, I think you have to go even farther, and I would commit to creating roundtables on a regular basis in specific neighborhoods where I could bring together community media and ethnic media and have specific targeted discussions as mayor very directly on a regular basis. And that's the kind of outreach that we need to be doing every single week and every single month.
Thank you. Ms. Francis?
I actually support it. And again, I'd like to thank you guys for having me. I would take it a step further and say that as mayor, I would create a dedicated office, because as an information scientist, as a data scientist, and it is very important to ensure that communities of these immigrant communities, marginalized communities, get the information that they need. And I understand that the media channels are important. So you definitely have my support. You would have a mayor, and you would have a mayor that is a friend in City Hall.
Okay. And Councilmember Menchaca, I know that you spoke about a czar earlier. So if you could expand on that in your own support.
Absolutely. The czar idea came from you all. And I want to allow you to take the lead in really asking for the support that you need from the city to ensure that you have what you need to stay whole. We know when El Diario was thinking about moving online only, we came together. And so what we need to do is ensure that all ethnic media, there are some small shops with 1 or 2 reporters engaging thousands of New Yorkers. So we need to understand what you need, and we need to provide that. When there are over 40% of homes right now that do not speak English at home, we know that you are there to bring critical information. And so funding is at the front of this. And when we look at some of the budgets are getting better, but we're not there yet. Imagine if we gave 50% to ethnic media rather than the small 10 less percent that usually goes to the New York Times, Daily News, the Post. That is now where we need to be spending our city tax dollars to ensure that you have what you need to be able to do the reporting. And the last thing I want to say is there's no reason why in this day of an age that the mayor of New York, and this is what I'm going to be bringing, can have the languages spoken and have a team of folks that anytime a mayor makes a presentation, a news, anything relating to the news, that it can be translated immediately that same day, and that you have that translated rather than forcing you to translate it into language, into the newspaper. So that's what I will be doing, and we can make that happen.
Great. I know that we're rounding up. Thank you for that. I wanted to ask, this is sort of going to be a collusion of sorts. We're going to try and jam as many of these questions as we can. And this has popped up. But I wanted to ask, just again, these are just as brief as you possibly can, and feel free to expand later. This is your opportunity to engage when you have the time. But how important is it for you to appoint a commissioner, police commissioner of color in your administration? Mr. Donovan, we'd start with you.
I've committed publicly to do that. I would absolutely do that. And I've worked with great leaders like Chuck Ramsey and others around the country, police leaders of color who have actually made deep reform. So I would do that. And I would just say very quickly, in the chat, I've just given information. We do a daily media availability. Thank you, George, for pointing out that out. We've been sending it to as many community-based and ethnic media sources as we can. But if you're not on that list, please let us know, and we will be in touch with you.
Great, thank you. Ms. Francis.
Yes, I would commit to appointing a person of color. As I said, I worked for the police department. I did not leave because I was running for mayor. I left because of systemic, racial and hiring practices. But it is important to have a diverse police, a top brass that is diverse, and not just the commissioner, right? There are so many different leadership roles within the NYPD that are not as diverse as they should be. So I would not just start with appointing a person of color as commissioner. I will also move to diversify the top brass and all of the deputy commissioners that are currently serving for the within the NYPD.
Thank you. Council member?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. Let's also ask, I mean, again, we're sort of collapsing as much as we possibly can here, but in terms of education, as you know, CUNY, where we're all sort of housed at the moment as part of this forum, virtually anyway, you've had legislators come out and support a new deal for CUNY. Are you pledging support for that as well? And under your administration, what specifically will you do to ensure that CUNY is purely funded and can speak to the concerns of largely a minority and immigrant community and its student population? And I'll go right back to Ms. Francis.
Yes, and we are releasing a comprehensive plan to fund CUNY.
Okay. Council member.
Yes, absolutely. And this is part of my New York City Green New Deal. We won't be able to do the training and education without a free CUNY. Absolutely.
Mr. Donovan.
Yeah, absolutely. When I was budget director for President Obama, I led the creation of the free community college proposal. I would make community college at CUNY free. It's one of the jewels of our public education system. And for any income qualified New Yorker, I would make sure that they graduate a four-year college at CUNY completely debt-free.
Okay. And finally, we are in the middle of this pandemic, in the middle of any number of different constraints in terms of communication. We've got ranked choice voting just around the corner, and you'll all be part of that. And I'm wondering if you could speak to how your campaign is specifically engaging not just this community, but at large with an untested system as regards to mayoral primary. And if you're going to go on the record as who it is that you're collaborating with at this point, what other campaigns you're looking to plug while you're on with us. And I'll start with council member.
So thank you. And I know we have not a lot of time, but I do support ranked choice voting. I have been supporting it. We're going to be doing that in multiple languages to educate our local members. And there have been so many immigrant communities that have become citizens in the last 8 years through CUNY Citizenship Now. And so we're going to be talking to them because they're the ones that are ready to engage. And I'm open to work with candidates, and there's nothing very specific today.
All right, Ms. Francis.
Yeah, nothing very specific, but I support ranked choice voting. We have already registered new thousands of new voters, and as I said, I'm going to, I'm listening to my supporters, and we are working to see, who to best partner with.
This is just a final note. The series is called Newsmakers. So if anybody wants to break ranks and just make some news today, you're all more than welcome. Sean?
Well, Deborah Lee, I also support ranked choice voting, and I'm trying to make sure every New Yorker knows about it. I actually released videos in English, in Espanol. So I will make sure that I keep trying to communicate as broadly as possible on the importance of ranked choice. I also support it because I reached out to London Breed, who's the first African-American woman ever to be mayor of San Francisco. She was elected under ranked choice in a city that's got a very small African-American population today. And I think it does increase democracy by encouraging more people to vote. And it gives candidates who might not otherwise been heard in our city a chance to get elected under ranked choice. And so I think all of that is good, and I'm very supportive of it.
Great. Thank you. We are at the 3 o'clock mark. I'm going to toss it to Graciela, but before I do, I just want to say thank you to our panelists, of course, for spending time with us this afternoon. We know it's not the end of the conversation, but merely the beginning in whatever languages we can manage. But certainly, thank you as well to the Center for constantly putting together this kind of conversation that's so vital and robust. We weren't able to get to all the questions. It'd be impossible to do so in this format, but rest assured that you should reach out to the candidates and they will in fact do their due diligence. So thank you again, Graciela.
Thank you, Deborah Lee, and thank you, Carlos, Kwanda, Sean, and Maya, who's gone. Please, for the reporters in the room, we sent last week an invitation to apply for our reporting fellowships. Ranked choice voting is one of the issues we want you to be covering, and we're going to be offering some workshops and some training, and also some stipends for you to cover that. So if you haven't applied to the fellowship yet, you have a few days before the deadline. And we will be sending you the information and the invitations for the next forums, and also for forums that we will do with city council candidates in the next months. So we'll be in touch, and thank you. And we will share all the questions with the campaigns for sure. Have a nice afternoon.
Gracias, everyone. Thank you.
Hasta luego. Muchas gracias.
Big elbow
Gracias a
up to all of
todos.
you.
Que estén bien.
Gracias.